I was 58 when the Frontier Logistics Corps finally let me go, and Sarge was already gray at the muzzle by then, same as me. We'd run backcountry supply escort together for 11 years before that. Run, not walked. Because a working dog doesn't retire the day the harness comes off. He just changes jobs. His new job was lying under my table at the last signal, the bar 3 doors down from Kelver Depot, while I nursed a coffee I didn't much want, and let the quiet do what quiet does to a man who used to have somewhere to be. That was the day the Halkin came in with their manifests. There were 2 of them, tall and gray-skinned, joints that bent wrong by human measure, moving in that clipped, precise way they always did, like men walking to a metronome only they could hear. They set a data slate on my table without asking, and told me, in the flat voice of people reading someone else's decision out loud, that my dog's service designation was being closed. Sarge was being reclassified from working asset, retired, to companion animal, non-essential. The benefits attached to the first designation, the depot vet credits, the ration supplement, the priority housing, attached to the second, they explained, only if I could demonstrate continued operational relevance. A dog that no longer worked was, on their ledgers, a dog that no longer counted. I didn't argue. Arguing with a Halkin assessor is like arguing with weather. I signed where they pointed, and Sarge, who had heard sit in 6 different alien dialects and never needed the translation, put his head back down on my boot and went on ignoring both of them, same as he'd ignored every officer who'd ever mistaken quiet for slow. The Halkin call that indifference a design flaw. I've always thought it was the whole point. The senior assessor, older by the length of his crest ridge and slower to speak than his colleague, lingered a moment after she'd already turned for the door. He crouched down, joints folding in that wrong-angled way, and studied Sarge the way you'd study a piece of equipment you suspected the paperwork had gotten wrong. He does not perform, he said, more to himself than to me. He does not patrol. He does not signal threat. I told him Sarge hadn't needed to signal a threat in 11 years of running that supply line, because nothing had ever gotten close enough to become one. The assessor considered that, filed it under whatever heading his species keeps for things it doesn't have a category for, and followed his colleague out. The 2 assessors were still at the bar an hour later, waiting out a transport delay, same as half the room, when the depot's main grid dropped. Kelver Depot runs on Halkin-built power architecture, same as most of this frontier arm, and Halkin power architecture does not fail quietly. Every light in the last signal went the flat, sourceless gray their species uses instead of true dark, and I understood, in that first half-second, why nobody had told me the Halkin build for structured light the way we build for gravity. They don't panic in the dark the way a man panics in the dark. They panic in the absence of pattern. Both assessors were on their feet before the emergency lamps kicked on, and by the time the lamps did kick on, dim, amber, useless by their standard, the 2 of them were pressed back against the bar's rear wall, with their long hands spread flat against it, breathing in a hard, arrhythmic clatter I'd never heard a Halkin make. Somewhere behind the bar a glass went over and shattered, and that sound seemed to be the thing that finally broke the room open. Around them the crowd was filling up fast with the same thing, colonists and haulers and one off-duty customs officer, all crowding toward the door, in the particular ugly hurry of people who've decided, all at once, that something is about to go very wrong. A woman near the window was calling a name that wasn't in the room. Somebody's chair went over. The dark itself hadn't done anything yet. It was the not knowing that was doing the work, same as it always is, in any species. I didn't move, neither did Sarge. He lifted his head off my boot, looked once toward the noise, and then settled his chin back down like the whole thing bored him. I put my hand on his shoulder, not to calm him, he didn't need it, and I said, "Quiet, the way you'd say it to a spooked horse rather than a dog. Easy." It wasn't for him. It was for the room. One of the Halkin assessors heard it. I watched the sound reach her before the meaning did. Her head turned toward my voice the way a compass turns toward north. Some old animal reflex under all that alien architecture recognizing a calm register when it heard one, and wanting, badly, to borrow it. She said something fast in her own tongue to the other assessor, who didn't answer, too far gone in the dark to process language at all. I got up. Sarge got up with me, unhurried, tail giving one slow arc like this was any other evening walk, and the two of us crossed the room to where the panic was thickest. I didn't grab anyone. I didn't shout an order. I walked Sarge between the crowd and the door, at the same unhurried pace he'd have used checking a supply line for tripwire, and people who a minute ago had been climbing over each other found themselves, without quite deciding to, falling in step behind an old gray-muzzled dog, who clearly wasn't worried about anything in the room. The customs officer stopped shoving. A hauler who'd had his hand on another man's collar let go of it. Someone laughed, short and startled, at the absurdity of taking their cue from a dog, and the laugh did almost as much work as the dog did. It is a strange thing to watch a crowd's heartbeat slow because an animal declined to raise its own. But I'd seen it before, on worse nights than this one, and I'd stopped being surprised by it a long time ago. I got to the two assessors last. The younger one had her back flat to the wall, her hands over the sensory ridges along her jaw, still breathing wrong. Sarge sat down in front of her. Just sat, the way he used to sit at the end of a cleared route, waiting for the next order that meant the danger was past, and put his head against her knee. She went still. I don't know what that stillness cost her, culturally. I know what it looked like. A woman who trades in classifications finding out, in real time, that some things communicate without a manifest. Her hand came off her jaw and landed, slow, uncertain, on the fur between his ears. She didn't pet him so much as confirm he was real. The grid came back up 4 minutes later. Halcyon infrastructure fails in flashes and heals in flashes, same as everything else about them, and the amber lamps gave way to the room's ordinary white light, and everyone in the last signal remembered, more or less at once, that they were embarrassed. Nobody talked about it. That's the frontier for you. But the younger assessor came and found me at the bar afterward, composed again, formal again, and set her data slate down a second time. The designation, she said. It requires revision. I asked her what changed. She looked down at Sarge, who had gone back to being unimpressed with the entire evening, chin already resting on my boot, and she said, careful, like she was translating a concept her own language didn't quite have a slot for, that a working asset is defined by function performed under operational stress. She said the grid failure had constituted operational stress. She said the function had been performed. I told her she didn't need to file anything. She filed it anyway. Hal can always do. I still have the corrected slate somewhere, the one that reads working asset, active, no expiration listed, which is its own kind of joke given how old we both are now. But I think about that hand on his fur more than I think about the paperwork, the way it landed like she was checking a fact, and the way the fact held. Sarge died 3 winters later, in his sleep, on the porch, in the sun, the way you'd want any good dog to go. I buried him under the window at the last signal, at the owner's invitation, and the bar keeps his old bowl on the shelf behind the register to this day. Travelers ask about it sometimes. I tell them it belonged to a working dog. I don't usually tell them the rest. But I'll tell you, the night the lights went out on Kelver Depot, it wasn't the manifest that decided what Sarge was worth. It was a room full of frightened strangers, choosing, one at a time, to walk at his pace instead of their own.